So here I a lot of disappointment. So I hop in my car Friday morning after Thanksgiving and I drive down to Bakersfield. They do their potluck on Sunday morning. Guess what we had for lunch? Leftovers. Thanksgiving leftovers. There was a green bean casserole there, and yes, it wasn't a traditional green bean casserole. 4 Thanksgiving dinners. Can you talk about abundance in my life? This is how abundance shows up sometimes. Not a single one of them had a traditional green bean casserole. So I decided I had to make one myself, which I did just the other night. It's a nice, lighthearted little metaphor for sticking the landing. All those twists and turns, showing up hopeful, expectant, joyous. Yes, I'm going to get my green bean casserole. No, I'm not going to get my green bean casserole. Yes, I'm going to get my green bean casserole. No, I'm not going to get my green bean casserole. Lots of disappointment there. And isn't life like that sometimes? And pretty soon, we just have to kind of take responsibility for that. And so I got back from Bakersfield last weekend, went to the store, bought myself some green beans and those French fried onion things and the cream of mushroom soup, and I made myself a green bean casserole. And I ate it, and I loved it. That's how we stick to landing, folks. You just roll with the punches. You know, those disappointments come in and you acknowledge them and you accept them. That is, it's just the way it goes. And you roll with the disappointment and you acknowledge it and you accept it. And then pretty soon you say, I'm going to take responsibility for this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to create this. And so you create it. In life, we have other twists and turns, disappointments that are much, much greater than a lack of a traditional green bean casserole, right? Howard Thurman, in his book, The Moments of My High Resolve, calls those spins and turns of life the dust and the grit of the journey. And we get lost in despair and disillusionment and even sometimes disbelief, like, I can't believe this is happening. And I don't know about you, but in spite of the fact that this new thought teaching of ours teaches that we are only as old as we think, I sometimes feel, as I age, that it gets more and more difficult to land on my feet. Sometimes it seems like life's disappointments just kind of pile up. And you get one disappointment after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other. And pretty soon it becomes more and more difficult to land on our feet. Not to mention the balance is sometimes a little off. The strength isn't what it used to be. So we have to work harder to land on our feet. And I've watched this phenomenon happen before with other people. I watched it with my mother and my grandmother. The disappointments piled up, and pretty soon they were locking their doors and living in fear, and they had their curtains shut all the time. And I looked at them and I said, I'm not going to be like that when I get to be that age. Now, I'm much older than either one of them was when I made that observation. I have yet to close my curtains. I do lock my doors. Life has beaten me up a little bit. But see, I have tools around here. We have tools. We have lots of tools to land on our feet. And these tools, it's called principle. We teach principle around here in this new thought teaching. Principle is not something we do, it's something we live, it's something we are. Here's an example of some principles. Love, unconditional love. Our triune nature within us, body, spirit, soul, it's all within us. Oneness, You guys talk about oneness in your mission and your vision statement at the beginning of every Sunday. I love that you do that because it puts it right out there. We are one. I just love that. Those are principles. Well, the principle today I want to talk about is called a divine spark. It's that fire that comes from the passion that one voice sang of today. You know, the outline that I received for this talk today came from Centers for Spiritual Living, and they wanted me to talk about catching the divine spark. And I thought, no, this isn't something we catch. It's not something that gets thrown to us from somebody or something out there. We create the divine spark. We make our own damn green bean casserole. We create it within ourselves. That's just the way we do it. Because from oneness, I don't know about you guys, but from oneness, I believe in my power. I believe in my creative nature. I believe in the creative process that we teach around here. I believe that we have the power to create our lives. I believe that we are one with Spirit all the time. I believe in that love, that unconditional love, that is another name for God, that is everywhere present. And that means that instead of catching a divine spark that was thrown to me from somewhere out there, I get to create that divine spark. I get to create it by who and what I am. You know, in Centers for Spiritual Living, we have our founder, Ernest Holmes. You guys have your founders, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. The Fillmores didn't really have a lot of stuff for me to quote today, but Ernest Holmes sure did. Oh my goodness. He said, as the Christ within awakens, the divine spark shot from the central fires of the universal flame is able to warm other souls by the radiance of its own self-unfoldment. Isn't that beautiful? And isn't this season all about Christmas, the Christ within each and every one of us? It is for me. And in that quote, he's talking about two principles. He's talking about the principle of awakening the inner Christ within each and every one of us, that Christ consciousness. And this Christmas thing, you know, it's a gigantic ball of Christ consciousness and metaphors for it with all the lights and the gifts and the giving and all of it. It's just a beautiful metaphor for that loving and giving. And all the parties. You know, and the parties are really, really nice. But you know what? If we don't have the Christ consciousness within us when we go out to those parties, it's all just busy work. We're just going to another party. We got to have the Christ consciousness within us. We have to have that fire within us. We have to have that divine spark within us. I did a little more further research on what Ernest Holmes had to say about this thing. And he wrote something that I just have to read you the whole paragraph because it's so incredible and so beautiful. It's from a chapter in the Science of Mind textbook called The Teachings of Jesus. And the section he wrote this in is called The Cause of Human Troubles. Sometimes I love Ernest Holmes. He said, how are we to regain the lost paradise? Only through soul culture and by careful self-analysis. What is my viewpoint of life? This is a question each should ask himself. What do I feel my relationship to the great whole to be? What do I believe about the cause back of all? From whence come discouragement, fear, doubt, and calamity? They cannot proceed from the eternal source, that perfect fount of life, the inexhaustible one. Therefore, they must come from my own consciousness. They cannot be born of the truth. The truth is God, and God is free, happy, peaceful, ever poised in its own being. I must set myself right with the universe. I must find my way back to the central fire if I am to be warmed. I must find the source if I am to be supplied. I must be like God if I wish to realize its spirit in my life. And it's that last sentence that really got me. I must be like God if I wish to realize its spirits in my life. In the textbook, that sentence is written out in italics and bold letters and capitalizations and an explanation point, which means he thought that was a pretty important sentence too. So this is how we build the fire. It's how we create the spark. It's how we stick the landing. And we do so through soul culture and self-analysis. So I've just finished reading this absolutely beautiful paragraph in Holmes in the textbook, and I'm feeling on top of the world, and I'm feeling the fire, and I'm feeling the beautiful words. And then all of a sudden I go, what's soul culture? What is that? So I did, I work from my Kindle, and all my books are on Kindle now. So I did a search for soul culture. It's the only time in the textbook he mentions it. Typical Ernest Holmes fashion. He throws a term out there and then he doesn't really specifically expand on it or define it. So I had to do what I always do when I question something he's written. I had to read in context. I had to read the paragraphs leading up to the quote and the paragraphs following the quote. And he says, we come to this soul culture thing, this awareness of the spirit within us by approaching it with gratitude, with joy, peace, quiet confidence, with an open mind and a believing heart. And isn't that what our prayer chaplain talked about in our meditation and our invocation today? She already did it. You guys are already there. Doing this soul culture thing. And then, of course, we got to do the self-analysis, and you guys all know what that is. That's looking within. What am I feeling today? What's going on inside of me today? Always exploring those things. Changing whatever it is we're thinking if it's not serving us very well, so that we can stick the landing, so we can take the disappointments of life and land on our feet. And honestly, that call that Ernest Holmes says to be like God, that's kind of a controversial thing. I stand up here and I say, we've got to be like God. And sometimes I get some pushback for that, because there's a culture that says God is outside of us. It's separate. It's out there somewhere. But we teach here about oneness. God is within us. God's a part of us. We are a part of it. What on earth do you guys think being a child of God means? In Christianity, being a child of God means that you've been adopted into God's family. And you have to do certain things in order to be adopted. You're going to follow certain rules and do stuff. But here in New Thought, we just recognize the spiritual divinity inherent in each person. I look at each one of you in all of your unique manifestations, and I see divinity. I see a child of God within each one of you. And you know what's really cool is when I can go out into the world and see that divinity in everybody. that yes, God is a part of me and I am a part of it. And yes, I can and will and am like God. I can remember that and remind myself of that. Sometimes I hear people say, well, what would Jesus do? And I'm like, yeah, that's okay. You know, and we all know what Jesus would do. He'd feed the poor. He'd invite the sick in. He'd be practicing unconditional love. He'd be doing all that good, yummy stuff. And we can follow that and life will be pretty good. But ask ourselves, what would God do? Well, it depends on what your God is. I mean, in New Thought, for me, my God is energy. It's light. It's love. It doesn't do anything. It simply provides me with the resources and the willingness and the means to do the things that ought to be done by me. And so, you know, I can't really ask myself, what would God do? That's a wrong question for me. The question is, what is God, and what can I, as a human manifestation of God, do to land on my feet? To be the energy that God is, to be love, to be compassion, to be truth. That's how we be like God. That's how we stick the landing. That's how we land on our feet in spite of numerous disappointments. We quiet our minds in meditation and we contemplate with peace and confidence and joy and gratitude what is ours to do as we be like God. And then we affirm with absolutely beautiful prayer what we have learned. And then we go out into the world, little godlings, on a spiritual path, acting as emissaries of God. And that, my friends, is how we stick the landing. Thank you very much. Hello?